and thank you all for being here. Antisemitism is a growing problem in Canada. Although the Jewish community is just 1% of Canada's population, it has been the #1 target for hate crime since 2023. And this number may be significantly higher as incidents are only counted if they are reported to police. The Jewish community is also the target of 70% of religiously motivated hate crimes. It is against this backdrop that the Senate Committee on Human Rights launched a study of antisemitism in Canada. And today, I am proud to share our finished report, Standing United Against Antisemitism, Protecting Communities and Strengthening Canadian Democracy. My name is Paulette Senior and the chair of this committee. I'm joined today by Senator Leo Housakos, beside me here, who will provide an overview of the report in French, by Senator David Arnot, who suggested the committee take on this difficult subject, and by Senator Kristopher Wells, who has been a champion of human rights throughout his professional career. We will all speak to different aspects of the report and touch on some of the 22 recommendations we have made with the aim of uniting Canada against antisemitism. Then we'll be happy to take your questions. Our committee heard many troubling stories and statistics about the rise of antisemitism in Canada. Some young Jewish students have opted to conceal their identity to avoid name-calling and bullying. Some working adults have said that they have felt a need to conceal synagogue affiliations or associations with Israel. And most alarmingly, places of worship, community centers, and schools have been threatened and even damaged by gunfire, arson, and vandalism. It is unacceptable to me and to our committee that a community of people should live in fear just because of who they are or what they believe in. The recommendations in our report outline steps the federal government should take to push back against this discriminatory behavior. For me, one of the key ways to solve this problem is education. It is a sad fact that internet and social media have made anti-Semitic materials more available than before, even to those who do not search it out. Young people are particularly vulnerable. Deborah Lyons, the former Special Envoy in Preserving Holocaust Remembrance and Combating Anti-Semitism, told us that online hate has exploded in recent years. It had reached the point that she formed a task force with her international counterparts to try to force some accountability from social media platforms. The CEO of the Center for Countering Digital Hate went even further. Imran Ahmed told us outright that antisemitism is profitable for social media companies. Controversy creates engagement, engagement creates profit. Algorithms do the rest, amplifying even the most hateful content to keep the money flowing. The effects can already be seen. B'nai B'rith Research and Advocacy Director Richard Robinson told us plainly that we are losing the battle against Holocaust denial. What was once a matter of settled, historic, and profoundly tragic fact now appears to be up for debate. That's why our committee believes that education must play a leading role in turning back anti-Semitism in Canada. We are urging the federal government to develop and support digital literacy and social media initiatives to help young Canadians recognize misinformation, extremist content, and online hate. We also urge government to establish a digital safety commission with a mandate to address the amplification of online harms and regulatory mechanisms to improve the transparency and accountability of digital platforms. An educated population will think twice when faced with disinformation. An educated population knows that vilifying a people, any people, because of race or religion is wrong. An educated population will be united against anti-Semitism. Thank you. I will now invite Senator Housakos to make his remarks.
Merci beaucoup, Sénateur Senior. Merci à tous d'être ici pour le lancement du rapport du Comité sénatorial de droits de la personne. Solidaire et uni contre l'antisémitisme, protéger les communautés et renforcer la démocratie canadienne. Depuis l'attaque de terroristes du Hamas contre des civils israéliens le 7 octobre 2023 et la guerre à Gaza, les Juifs canadiens subissent une hausse des actes antisémites. Comme la sénatrice l'a mentionné, la population juive est la cible numéro 1 des crimes de haine. Pourtant, elle représente seulement 1% de la population du Canada. Mais le statistique ne suffit pas à expliquer l'urgence de la situation. La vérité, chers amis, est simple. Les Canadiens juifs sont menacés. Ils sont menacés dans leur quartier. Ils sont menacés dans leur lieu de prière. Et ils sont menacés dans leurs écoles. Chaque jour rapporte des événements qui semblaient impossibles qu'il y a quelques années. Dans tous ces chaos et tous ces bruits, il est facile de ne plus être choqué. De quartiers juifs sont visés par de manifestants. Ces gens attaquent de familles ici pour des raisons politiques liées à un conflit qui est très loin du Canada. Aujourd'hui, la plupart des Canadiens n'aiment pas les actions du gouvernement russe, par exemple. Pourtant, nous ne voyons pas de groupes de partisans ukrainiens attaquer des quartiers russes ici dans notre pays. Et pourtant, pour une partie de la population, il semble que n'importe quel juif soit une cible acceptable pour ceux qui s'opposent aux actions d'Israël. Ainsi, des enfants qui jouent dans leur jardin, de parents qui portent leurs courses ou de grands-parents en visite subissent soudainement des insultes et de l'intimidation. Cela arrive juste à cause de leur identité. Cela devrait nous choquer profondément en tant que Canadiens et en tant d'êtres humains. Et nous n'avons pas encore parlé de balles. Il y a eu des tirs, des incendies et des vandalismes dans des synagogues, des écoles et des centres communautaires. Pour comprendre l'urgence de ces problèmes, il est utile de regarder qui commet ces actes antisémites. Un exemple récent, juste ici, même à Ottawa, est très inquiétant. Le 9 juin 2025, un individu a jeté la peinture rouge sur le monument national de Holocauste. Il a écrit les mots « Feed me », puis il est parti. Cet individu était un homme de 40 ans, un employé de la ville d'Ottawa. C'était aussi un avocat qui a promis de protéger la loi et les libertés de tous. C'est une personne qui devrait comprendre la différence entre manifester légalement contre un État et profaner un monument dédié à 6 millions de personnes assassinées parce qu'elles étaient juives. Nous devrions encore une fois être choqués. Choqués comme un homme ordinaire puisse croire qu'un tel acte est justifié. Le gouvernement fédéral doit traiter la hausse de l'antisémitisme avec urgence parce que le problème se propage. Appliquer les lois qui existent déjà est une bonne point de départ. C'est pourquoi le comité recommande au gouvernement fédéral de travailler avec les provinces. Nous voulons créer des unités de police spécialisées contre les crimes de haine partout au Canada. Cette unité montrerait un soutien réel à la communauté juive. Elle aiderait aussi à retirer les criminels de nos roues. Dans le même esprit, le comité recommande de formation pour la police et les juges. Cela les aidera à mieux identifier les crimes de haine et à mieux réagir. Quand des foules de manifestants pensent avoir le droit de marcher dans les quartiers juifs avec des cris de haine, quand on tire sur des synagogues et des écoles, et quand des gens ordinaires pensent avoir le droit de commettre des actes de haine, nous avons un grand problème. Être juif au Canada ne devrait pas faire de vous une cible. Il est temps de reconnaître cela et de réagir et très vite. Les Juifs au Canada ne doivent plus vivre dans la peur. Les Juifs fiers de travailler, je suis fier, du travail de ce comité. Mais un rapport est utile simplement s'il est appliqué. Ce document doit être lu par le ministre et l'agence du gouvernement, mais particulièrement aussi par le premier ministre. À la fin de la journée, notre priorité est la sécurité des Canadiens juifs dans leurs écoles, leurs synagogues et leurs quartiers. Nous avons besoin que la sécurité publique à tous les niveaux du gouvernement soit unie pour combattre cet fléau. Il est temps de rester unis contre l'antisémitisme. Le Sénat propose un chemin clair dans ce rapport. Nous espérons que le gouvernement acceptera ces conseils et travaillera pour obtenir des résultats réels. Merci beaucoup. Merci à la sénatrice Arnot pour le travail très intelligent et transparent qui était fait par ce comité. Et maintenant, je transfère la parole à sénateur Arnot.
Thank you, Senator Housakos, colleagues and members of the press. I want to begin by thanking my fellow senators and especially the witnesses who shared their experience with us as we heard their testimony. Their testimony made one thing clear. Anti-Semitism in Canada is not abstract. It is real and it is rising. It is being felt in schools, workplaces, places of worship, and across the digital space. It is in that context that I want to briefly address the special envoy recommendation we made. We heard directly about the important role that office played, providing leadership, coordination, and vital connection between the government and the Jewish community in Canada. We're concerned that this position has been eliminated and replaced with a broader structure whose mandate remains unclear. At a time like this, focus matters. That is why we're calling for the reinstatement of the special envoy alongside the accountability directly to Parliament. The special envoy did important work in building relationships in public education. This requires proper funding and support commensurate with the scale of the mandate. More broadly, what this study shows is that anti-Semitism is not only an attack on Jewish Canadians, it is an attack on our democracy. Hate speech is antithetical to democratic values because it is used as a weapon to intimidate and to stop minority voices from being heard in proper democratic discussion. When people feel unsafe expressing who they are or participating in public life, the promises of the Charter are not fully realized. Our response, therefore, must be practical and grounded. It starts with education, ensuring Canadians understand anti-Semitism, but also that they have the tools to recognize misinformation and hate. And above all, it means acting with clarity and purpose. Anti-Semitism is a serious issue that demands a serious and immediate response. It requires stronger institutions, clear processes, better training, and accountability when incidents occur. It means supporting our justice system to respond effectively to hate-motivated offenses. It means confronting the reality that anti-Semitism is being amplified online at a scale that we've never seen before. Above all, it means acting with clarity and purpose, because this is not only about protecting one community, it's about protecting democratic values that define Canada. It requires coordination and collaboration between the federal, provincial, territorial, and municipal governments. We heard that Jewish Canadians feel threatened to an extent never felt in the past. They fear for the safety and lives of their community, their families, and their children. They feel their concerns have not been heard and not acted upon. When the rights of Jewish Canadians are not respected, it diminishes, in fact, the rights of all Canadians. Canada is a country that is founded on the freedom of expression. That is not a question, but our courts have been clear. Expression that promotes hatred towards identifiable groups undermines the very conditions that make freedom meaningful. This report is not about limiting debate. It is about ensuring that all Canadians, including Jewish Canadians, can participate in that debate safely and equally. And that's why our focus is on education, accountability, and democratic resilience, not censorship. The issue is acute. Immediate action is demanded. Thank you. I will now turn the microphone to Senator Wells.
Thank you, Senator Arnot and colleagues, and thank you all for being here on this important day. Before we address any questions, I'd like to briefly discuss a key recommendation that describes a lot of what we've talked about today. And that is, we believe that the federal government should immediately establish an interdepartmental task force to address anti-Semitism as outlined in recommendation number 9 in this report. The goal of this task force would be to bring together as many key federal departments and agencies to develop an effective, coordinated, and comprehensive response to anti-Semitism and to report back to Parliament annually on its progress. In particular, on the enforcement side, the RCMP, CSIS, and Justice Canada would play a critical role in the important work of this task force. Collectively, this task force would help bring us closer to the recommendations Senator Housakos has described, such as informing the work of specialized hate crimes units and Crown prosecutors, which I note the Government of Ontario has recently taken steps to support. On the education side, having departments like Canadian Heritage at the table would also be paramount, as public education and awareness are critical in addressing anti-Semitism and all forms of hate. For example, when we hear evidence that we are losing the battle against Holocaust denialism, this is a sign that something is deeply wrong and unsettling in our society. As the philosopher George Santayana has famously said, those who cannot repeat the past are condemned to repeat it. In this climate of rising hate, this is a particularly alarming thought, not just for Jewish Canadians, but for all Canadians who experience prejudice, discrimination, and hate. Historically, anti-Semitism has walked hand in hand with other forms of hate and prejudice. To keep silent in the face of rising anti-Semitism therefore imperils not only Canada's Jewish community, but the very social fabric of Canada's inclusive democracy. The threat to Canada's multicultural and pluralistic society is not incidental. During our study, we heard that malign foreign actors have used anti-Semitism and other disinformation campaigns to attempt to divide Western society against itself. We've also heard from a University of Alberta student who spoke to us about her concerns of foreign interference on campus supporting diverse protests aimed at chilling speech and causing fear and intimidation. Again, the National Task Force should have a mandate to address concerns about foreign interference so those who seek to divide us do not succeed in weakening or imperiling our democracy. Now is the time to take concerted, sustained, and decisive action to stand united against anti-Semitism. Together, we are stronger and can stand up and speak out against rising anti-Semitism and hate in Canada. We'd like to thank you for joining us this morning, and now we would be pleased to address any of your questions.
It's now time for questions from reporters. We'll start in the room, followed by people online. You're allowed one question and a follow-up. Alexa McKee, Globe and Mail.
Sure. Thank you, Senators. What would you say was the most concerning or surprising finding in your report?
So I invite my colleagues to respond. I think for me personally, it was the stories that we heard about students in particular and what they were facing. Their fear on campuses, their feeling that they have to hide their identity. That is something that personally broke my heart in terms of how important it is for folks to be able to be completely self-expressed in who they are and be proud of their identity. That broke my heart. It may not have been that surprising, but was deeply, deeply sad for me because it was also really covered extensively in the media. But to be hearing the stories and seeing the folks in front of us at the committee, I think that's the piece that really grabbed me. Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
I'll just quickly add to that I was shocked that there were witnesses, particularly young witnesses that came before us that, to reiterate the point of the chair, weren't feeling secure. And the number one promise that we give to Canadians as a society, those of us that are in public life, is peace, order, and good government. So clearly, from the testimony we've heard from various sources, we are failing Canadians, and particularly the Jewish community, when it comes to peace, order. So that was what was a little bit disappointing and shocking from my point of view.
I'd like to say quickly that I was shocked by what we heard of evidence from Canadian Jews who have lived in Canada their whole life, thinking of leaving Canada because of the acute nature of the hate that they're facing and the real intimidation and threats of violence against them. That, to me, is truly shocking. And it just speaks to the nature of the degree of the issue. This is why it's so compelling. We have to have action, no dithering. The time's now.
Yeah, I would add, coming from a community, the 2S LGBTQI plus community that unfortunately experiences hate almost on a daily basis, I wasn't maybe shocked, but very saddened to know that hate continues to be prevalent, omnipresent, where people are no longer feeling safe in their very homes, on their streets, out in public spaces. Hate is a message crime. It doesn't just attack individuals. It's designed to instill fear and terror into entire communities. And that's why we need to have a government response. We need to send the message that no matter whom it targets, hate is not a Canadian value, and we will stand up against it.
Follow up.
Dylan Campbell, Canadian Press.
Hi, Dylan Robertson. Sorry for the shuffle here. I'm wondering about your point about dialogue. It seems like you're saying in this report that either we're not talking enough or we don't have a ability right now to have a charter compliant, productive conversation. There's a part in the report that says, as you said on stage about we don't want censorship. Can you kind of unpack how we've been talking as Canadians about the Middle East and what path you see to having a more productive conversation?
I think that's why you see in the report so many recommendations that deal with education, happening in our school system, where young people are living their lives increasingly online in very polarized environments where we have what I call these angry algorithms that are manufacturing rage, feeding content, isolation, alienation, where we need to get back to the human experience, right? Sitting across the table from each other, sharing our stories, our commonalities, what makes it so great to be, here, in Canada, being aware and mindful of geopolitical conflicts all over the world. But how do we equip young people to be able to have those conversations without shutting down, actually having those critical thinking skills and abilities, and calling on educators, whether we're talking in the K-12 system or in the university, to teach those skills and to also teach the history, right? Hate has a history behind it. It's just not something that is just showing up today. But once you understand sort of the origins and the experiences of the other, then we can sort of build together.
Canada is a pluralist society. We're a multicultural society. And up until very recently, we've managed to keep geopolitical conflicts off our shores. I remarked, I stated in my remarks, we have a very existential crisis going on now for a long period of time in Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine. We don't see Ukrainians and Russians fighting in Canadian neighborhoods and taking shots at each other. There's conflicts going on in Cyprus, in occupied Cyprus. We don't have the Greek community and the Turkish community in Montreal, Toronto, going to each other's place of worship, calling death to each other. There was a conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh between Azerbaijan and Armenia. We didn't have Armenians and Azerbaijanis in Toronto calling death to each other. So it is quite unique what is going on right now to the Jewish community. And I don't think it has to do with dialogue. This isn't dialogue. This has to stop. We have Canadian laws when it comes to hate. We have a tradition in this country, wherever you come from, whatever God you worship, we live in peace and harmony. Canada was never, even from the day it was founded, a homogeneous society, a one-faith nation or a one-race nation. And it has built this great foundation that the world is envious of. And we have to figure out why, since October 7, 2023, this equilibrium has been broken, and we need to get back to that equilibrium of peace and justice in our society, and quickly.
I'd like to say that we need to focus on the education system, particularly grades K to 12, so that you can build a foundation to have this kind of dialogue. I think Canadian education has failed. I think we need to focus on teaching students in grades K to 12 the rights of Canadian citizenship, but the responsibilities that come with those rights. And in fact, the responsibility to respect your fellow citizen. Democratic values are very important, and this is the hallmark of Canada. We need to fully engage students in the K to 12 system so that they have the foundation to have a proper dialogue and the respect that every Canadian citizen deserves, no exceptions.
As a follow-up, I noticed there was anti-Zionism is mentioned in the report. It sort of speaks to how certain groups had talked about how this is the new anti-Semitism, this is the cover for anti-Semitism. It also includes an opposite perspective that people feel their speech about Israel is not being allowed, or that this is a threat to it. And in my initial skim of the report, I didn't see sort of a stance from the committee or the report. I guess I'm just asking if there was a stance on whether the way that the committee sees anti-Zionism when it comes to anti-Semitism, is this a free speech issue? Is this sort of a rebranding of anti-Jewish hate?
Maybe I'll start and ask my colleagues to join in. I think this is part of the crux of how difficult this issue is. And I know that as a committee member, I was not interested in taking a position on Zionism or any other ism other than standing to support Jewish Canadians to address anti-Semitism. And that's where my focus was. It's not on deciding on the value or not of Zionism. I think we're more concerned to make sure that Jewish Canadians can feel safe, that we can bring attention to the hate that they've been experiencing, particularly since October 7th, and that we can address it. We were a committee that were open, and we did hear many perspectives. And so taking a position on the different perspectives was not our aim. And the position that we're taking on anti-Semitism is that it must stop and that we have to address it. And so the 22 recommendations that we've put forward is about addressing the hate that the Jewish community is facing.
I'll just quickly add that any ism is no justification for violence and intimidation against any people. Simple as that. It doesn't matter what the ism is. It is not a justification for intimidating and carrying out acts of violence.
I would just say to that as well, we acknowledge the dialogue and the debates from all of the different perspectives we heard, but, this is a real world sort of issue. Hate and anti-Semitism are on the rise in Canada. We're not going to get caught in debates about, whether that is happening on our streets and our communities. You just have to turn on the news every day to see how it's impacting Canadians, where we want to focus on pragmatic solutions, things that immediately the government can take action on to make the Jewish community safer, to make all of our vulnerable communities safer today, not somewhere down the line. So this was really a report about action and immediate action to address the realities of hate that are before us on our streets, in our homes, and in our communities.
Peut-être une question en français, sénateur Housakos. Qu'est-ce que les membres du comité espèrent accomplir avec la publication de ce rapport?
Nous espérons que le gouvernement va lire le rapport au début jusqu'à la fin. Il y a de bonnes recommandations. La recommandation de créer une task force où on va avoir une bonne communication avec tous les agences policières de partout, de tous les niveaux du gouvernement, pour la première fois, va donner les outils nécessaires pour être capable de combattre l'antisémitisme et les autres genres de racisme que nous avons dans ce pays-là. Il y a des racismes de différents niveaux, de différentes cultures qui sont victimes. L'objectif, c'est d'arrêter la violence, l'intimidation que présentement la communauté juive, depuis 2 ans, particulièrement ici au Canada, a eu des expériences hontes et difficiles à avaler dans un pays démocratique et libre. Et quand vous avez n'importe quel groupe qui vient en avant un comité sénatorial qui commence à réfléchir par rapport à leur avenir comme Canadiens, puis sont présentement dans une situation où ils pensent sérieusement de quitter le pays, là, c'est inacceptable dans un pays comme le Canada.
That's it for me. Well, this marks the end of the press conference. Madame, Messieurs. Oh.
Sorry, I always have more questions. I just wanted to understand a bit about the IRPA definition. It gets into some detail about the different views that were expressed on it, and the committee saying, look, we're not going to get into the debate around the definition of it because the point here is what's happening on the streets right now. I guess I'm just wondering if that was more of a consensus view of the committee, or if committee members felt strongly we need to dump IRPA, or IRPA is a really important part of this fight, or if it was more of a shared view of the committee, like this definition thing is getting us nowhere.
I think I would say it is a shared view of the committee. These definitions are just tools to understand the phenomenon of anti-Semitism. There are no rules to be enforced. You can have semantic debates about what the meaning of anti-Semitism for a long time. The IR definition took 10 years to create. So lots of discussion, lots of debates. So semantic debates must not distract from the urgent need to effectively address the very real hostility that Jews encounter in Canadian society. That's clear. Thank you.
If you'll indulge me, one last question here about the envoy. I mean, this is recommendation number 1. I'm wondering what you as senators make of how the government has handled this. We had testimony that the community was not really told that this was going to happen. I'm not clear who actually asked for this. I'm not sure. I guess I'm wondering, what is your perspective on the government's decision to axe the envoy role? How is this handled? What does it tell us about how this government is dealing with the anti-Semitism issue?
Thank you for that question. It's a very good question. I think the envoy did a very exceptional job, and it was a very important role. But don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's a role to play for the envoy if the government wants to use that. And we think that the envoy has created a wealth of understanding, good relationships. We should be building on that, not eliminating it. We have an advisory group, but we don't know what they're going to do. Before you eliminate something, you should really think about what you can do to build on that. And that's why we're recommending it. The recommendations on in any priority, but we do feel that that should be revisited because there is a role that could be played. Perhaps there'll be a direct role if there was enough resources and value put in the envoy's role, perhaps working directly with the joint task force that we're talking about, because there was certainly a wealth of good work done by the person who was the envoy in the past. And there wasn't a lot of discussion in the general public about that. And we made that recommendation very purposely.
And there are no people online, so I guess this marks the end of the press conference. Madame, Messieurs, merci beaucoup. Thank you.
Thank you.